All right, good afternoon. Welcome to our session where we're going to talk about Feature Feast and our journey around building a data buffet for models and specifically for model building. I'm Shanna Anderson. I'm joined by Ryan Kaplan, and we'll introduce ourselves a little bit more in just a moment. But today, what we're going to cover, there we go. So we're going to talk about supply chain, and we're going to talk about it around food, and it's getting to be about dinner time, so maybe folks are getting to be about hungry, and who doesn't love food? So this is a great way just for us to have a little fun as we're talking about how we built out a feature store and some comparisons of how our food chain works to also our data supply chain. We're also going to talk about features themselves with a little bit of focus there, and then what the value is of the feature store that we've built and the journey that we continue on with it as well. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Shanna Anderson. It says up there I'm the Senior Director of Customer Data and Insights. I will say I have a little bit of an identity crisis right now because just recently I moved into an enterprise transformation director role to help out with some modernization activities that we're doing in the bank. But last Monday we decided to buy a bank. And so with buying a bank, I am going to be leading our data acquisition work stream. So that is going to be probably my life for the next year and a half, 2 years. But most of my career is not in technology. I spent over 20 years in the consumer bank, working all the way from our branches up to retail strategy, where focused on incentive compensation, goals, also the way that we measure performance for our bankers. And that's really when I started working with technology teams and building agile squads before I entered the technology space. And I have learned a ton, and it's been an amazing journey. So very excited to see that continue on. But with that, I'm joined with
Awesome.
Ryan.
Hi, everyone. Ryan Kaplan. I'm responsible for the data tech platforms and operations for Fifth Third. I've been at the bank 5.5 years. Unlike Shanna, my whole career has been in technology and operations, so kind of went from DevOps, platform, cloud, to now doing data workloads and data platforms. So excited to be here.
All right, so we're out in Vegas, and so probably some people are looking at Fifth Third Bank, like, what is that? I haven't heard of that. It's a funny name. But if you're from the Midwest, you probably have heard of us. So Fifth Third Bank actually started by a merger of the Fifth National Bank and Third National Bank. So that brought us together and to be the improper fraction that we are. But we are currently in 11 states, mostly in the Midwest, all the way down from Michigan to Florida for our Southeast area. We actually just entered our 12th state when we opened our first Alabama branch a couple weeks ago. So we're very excited about that. And then we'll continue to expand our footprint with our Comerica acquisition that occurred last week, which will make us the 9th largest bank in the US. But our ambition is really to be the one bank that people most value and trust. And that's a big piece of everything that we do in the data world, including the feature store. Our internal and external customers are really the ones that we serve around any of the models that we build. And so that lives true even in our technology teams, all the way to our business teams that interact with customers on a daily basis. As a top performing bank in the Midwest, we are the recipient of numerous rewards. I think some of the ones that we are most proud of are some like at the top. We just recently won Best Mobile Application for a regional bank. So being part of the technology team, obviously that's something we're very proud of. And in the data teams, we played a big role in too. So lots of things that we love to be able to share out there because we believe that we do a lot of wonderful things, and it's nice when you get some accolades for it too. All right, so for today, we're going to talk a little bit about, we had an opportunity, and our opportunity was really how do we get to decisions and insights faster? And that's really important when you think about any business. If you can do that quicker, then that gets to value quicker for your teams as well as for your companies. And that's just one area where we focused in on our model building process, and specifically with feature store of how we could get to having features ready for model building much quicker than what we did in prior state. So some things that really point to what this opportunity is, and I know this is a quote that has been seen in the data world many times, but it's so true. We spend 60 to 80% of our time trying to find data, and that productivity loss for our data engineers, our data scientists, our MLOps engineers, think about how you can use that productivity in more valuable ways if you can cut out some of that data wrangling and not have to spend as much time doing that. And that was one of the things that we have worked towards solving with the feature store. Also, Get the clicker to work. There we go. As of 2032, the global big data market is projected to generate about $924 billion with a B. And that's something that we want our share of that too. And some of the models that we have and build process right now are using big data sets. And that's something that not only does it help us with credit decisioning for customers as we continue to work on those, as well as recommendations for customers, but it makes it where we can make better personalized decisions for our customers that come into our financial centers or that interact with us digitally. And that's a big piece of like, if we can work with this more efficiently, that's a game changer for us as we do model building at the bank. So let's talk about the supply chain. So here's where we start to have some fun with food. So if you think about food for yourself, and you go and you think about how your food gets to the place before you actually eat it, you start with some raw materials. So maybe that could be some fruits, that could be some vegetables, that could be some maybe fish out of the ocean. And then it's got to go somewhere to be processed. And after it's processed, then it can go and be turned into ingredients. And with those ingredients, then it can go to the supermarket where you can then buy it off of the shelf. And then after you take it from the supermarket and you go home, you're able to prepare it, and you can have a meal that comes out of those ingredients, all from that supply chain in each of those pieces. That's very similar to how we think about our data feature store and our supply chain around data to get into it. So first, if you think about raw materials, you have your raw source data, and then we have to process that data, and so we use dbt for that processing of the data as we continue to move it through that supply chain. And then our ingredients become features after we go through that transformation, which then shows up in the feature store. So that's our marketplace where then our data scientists, as part of building models, can go and pull down those features, which then goes into our MLOps platform that then equates into a model. So it's just fun in the way that we think about how that moves through each of those steps in the supply chain, just as much as your food does, as well as our features do as we get it into the feature store and then ready for model production. So let's now focus on features, and I'm going to turn it over to Ryan.
Awesome. First point. Great. So let's really focus on features themselves, which was like that first half of the supply chain Shanna walked through. So from a data standpoint, like what is a feature? It's simply a data property or characteristic of data that then can be used in a way the model understands it. From like the business or the data scientist point of view, a feature is really just the input to the model making process and ultimately what ends up driving the model. At Fifth Third, some of these features are something really basic like customer age, customer tenure, or it could be a more complex feature that's like maybe overdraft over the past year by account type. These features or ingredients that are built upon, if they're not trusted and known, it can cause challenges. And also, it's also a challenge to know where it came from, but also is it trusted. We've had examples where someone might have used a feature that wasn't complete because they simply didn't even know any better, so they try to make that feature themselves. And so give a little context about how many features are out there. Some models only use a handful of features, and some models use hundreds of features. We have a few hundred features in total in our feature store, but we plan to be in the thousands. So having that and continuing to grow that at scale and having the way to do that is really important. All right, so really think about feature store value. Like now that you understand the supply chain and what a feature is, let's talk about some of the challenges or opportunities we were trying to go after when trying to tackle this problem. The first is really as we looked at our MLOps pipeline and how to improve this process, one of the most important things was the data quality integrity. This is something that I think all of us really focus on and care about no matter what we're working on, but in our environment, particularly being regulated and having customer-sensitive data, that's the most important factor, yet it was normally after the fact. So we were doing those steps, but super manual, very time-consuming, kind of last minute. Also, the regulated environment would actually make it where every time we would have to use features, they have to get rebuilt and tested by governance and our model management team. So that's another factor that would just slow us down overall. Also, reusability, so feature reusability. we've had examples where features kept getting recreated, like I mentioned a second ago, that they thought were complete. So not only were data scientists or data engineering teams wasting their time building them, but they might have been building them incomplete when someone already had one solved and built, ready to go for them. So that is a really important one. And then really the centralized information, which I'm gonna kind of demonstrate that in a second, but how can you really find the information about those features, where it came from, is it trusted, where you wanna go. Think of, you're at Whole Foods and you're looking at the store, like you wanna know, is that sourced in the US, is it organic, et cetera? That's really important to be able to see that. So we're gonna play a little game that's kind of like Where's Waldo, but it's where's the feature. So can someone help tell me where the broccoli is on this slide? That was really fast. Okay. Point it out.
She's
What
quick.
part of the screen?
It's over in the middle right, a half behind the jar.
Left or right? Point. Right there? I made it too easy still. Okay. But you're right. So, I mean, obviously, look, we could find what we're looking for, but imagine you were at Whole Foods and the produce section was just a pile of bins and said, go hunt for your fruit. Like, that's not really the most effective use of time and organization. This is kind of like how we were using our features today, or how we used to leverage our features and how to find them. So, great. I wish I had a gift card for you. I don't, but you found it. Awesome.
You just got hosed.
Yeah. That was really quick. But now we went from chaos to organized. So those features now, just like at the grocery store, whether it's fruits, vegetables, condiments like dressings, seasonings, et cetera, we organize that in a logical way. Now, this will be different for your business and that, and we can talk about that a little bit, but really organization anyway, but especially with your features, is really powerful. So it's really important we focused on that. And look, even faster to find the broccoli now. Okay, so now that you can understand that, let's talk about the feature store components and how we built this to make this really come to life. The first is the data translation layer. So before, these were Python files all over the place that were being used to build features as required for those models. Now they're being built by taking those Python files, translating them to DBT models. Those then models, have a lot of benefits like scalability and performance, where before we were running these, depending on who needed to build what, how large it was causing contention in our environment that now with DBT, you'll see with Snowflake, doesn't really happen. And then probably also very important, there's historical views. So the historical view was not always there. Now, through this process and pipeline, the historical views of all runs are there, and we have some observability around it. So the next is really data monitoring. So not only do we have traditional data monitoring on these features, but we actually have built DBT models on top of those features that give us better observability. So for example, if your feature has something to do with a credit score, we all know a credit score can't be over 900, but if it's 1,000, clearly we have a data quality issue. So right then and there, that feature run can stop and say, hey, maybe something upstream of that feature changed, there's a bad data input, something else. That is really important, it's something that's built in. And then this one I think goes without saying with DBT, but the users in these groups doing this work before were not exposed to modern software development best practices. Things like CI/CD, version control, everything you kind of get with DBT today in a modern pipeline, code reviews, and also just basic testing. Like this is all inherently in the ecosystem that we normally wouldn't have had. And lastly, like leveraging DBT interoperability on our Snowflake platform. I mean, you've heard it all week, and if you've been using DBT for a while in Snowflake, but really that processing time is really the save here. So how do we get to more faster feature exploration? How do we empower our teams to actually leverage that data they need to be successful in a really controlled, manageable way? Is really helpful. All right, let's get into architecture. So this is not the actual architecture. I'm gonna show that in a second, but people, when you see architecture slides, the photos come out and they go, oh, this is the answer. I think hopefully you know that, but like we picked technologies that made sense for us based on our modern data strategy. So you're gonna see things in there, Snowflake, AWS SageMaker, DBT, DBT Cloud, AWS Lambdas, all these other pieces. We picked those because that's the strategy that our broader data organization was making at the time, and it really lent nicely to the feature store and what we had to deliver there. So I want to call that out. Also, we generally have a cloud-first mentality. So you'll see that spread throughout where we want to build what we can and not have vendor lock-in, and that was another benefit of this model and how we did this. But most importantly, it's just what's best for your capabilities and what your organization cares about. All right, so here's the real feature store architecture. I'll walk through this. It's very high level, but I'll talk to some of the details. Obviously, you're familiar with a lot of source system feeds. The bank is primarily still batch driven, but we are trying to get to real-time eventing as much as possible, so more and more of our data does flow through Kafka. And then that second hop there, where you see AWS and Snowflake, this is a huge component itself. We spent a lot of time in that modern data strategy to make it so it's easier to load data and get it into the environment. Now, you might say, okay, great, everyone loads data, but with a bank, and if you're in the financial services industry, you'll know this, like tracking things like PCI, PII data, using tokenization, obfuscating that data, et cetera, is a lot of work. That process has been streamlined and also benefits this feature store. You hear me talk about lineage and the quality. Right then is where we capture all the metadata about what the inputs are. So before you even build your features, we already know where that data came from, who it came from, why it's important, when it got there, et cetera. Really, really valuable. So that, I can't understate, that could be a whole presentation itself, but for that, just when you get to build your models, you know where it came from, you know who got it from, you know column by column, you know what's critical, the data is already protected the way it needs to be. And then you kind of get into the broader feature store umbrella. So few components with this. The first is obviously dbt. We started as pretty much a dbt core shop. Now we have dbt platform and cloud, and we're loving that. And then that obviously runs on Snowflake. We've been hinting at that the whole time. And we use SQL plus Python translations that run those dbt modules. There might be multiple features to one module or their models, or there might be one-to-one. It really, again, depends on the purpose of those, what it's used for, and how. Next, obviously, once that runs and is produced, we load it into we serve the features. And through that, that's where we get all of our secure processing, where up front we know who owns it, where it comes from. That hooks into our IDP for access, provisioning. The owners of that data get to become the owner in the system. So like approvals, what it's used for and why is all managed there really nicely. From there, then you kind of go to the bottom half of the slide where you see data science, right? So data science gets a few benefits, right? They can actually take, data science can train models from that, so they pull it from Snowflake. We use a few different mechanisms to go from Snowflake into AWS SageMaker to pull and manage that data, but they can load the features right there securely, or when they want to go look for data, they go to the left, and through our catalog that Shanna's going to talk a little bit more about in a second, we'll really show you what's available and why and how it's there. And then Elation is really our metadata about all the features and all the data that those features are built on in detail, where you can kind of see, again, lineage, more definitions, et cetera. So that's really the bulk of the architecture at a super high level. But now Shanna's going to talk us through a little bit about what it actually looks like from a data science perspective.
Yeah. All right, so Ryan talked about the back end, and I know every org is really, they're made up differently, but at least for us at Fifth Third, our data scientists, they actually sit in the business for the most part. So we have a data engineering that sits in the technology organization, but then data scientists mostly in the business, and they're building models. So we have to have some way that has a good UI that they can work with, because they can build their own features and load them into the feature store. And so we need to make sure it's simple, it's easy, it's automated, but also has a nice look and feel to it. And that's something where we have spent a lot of time, energy, planning, and strategy around our own data marketplace, of really how we have data products that people can search and they can use and they can create. We really consider Feature Store to be almost a cousin to that data marketplace. In fact, it's even a toggle over there. And so this is a screenshot of what that looks like for folks to be able to go out there to the Feature Store and be able to pull out features that they need. And that sits on our data exchange UI. So you can see like what that looks like. You can see where Feature Store is on there. It has just some different features that are shown there, and it gives you some quick high-level metadata of what exactly that feature is. So very clean, crisp, really clear on what exactly that data is in case you are looking for something. We want to make sure that that's giving you the right titling and insights to what you want to be able to pull into your model. It also shows you whether it's in prod or non-prod as part of the build, when it was created, and those types of things. So once you then take one of these features and click into it, it gives you a little bit more information.
And as you're clicking, that actually, we talked about data exchange, that's what we branded it, but that's custom built, but on top of ServiceNow. So you're trying to connect the dots in the architecture.
Yep, exactly. So we were able to customize that for our data products as well as for Feature Store. So same as when you're in the store and you want to know what's in your food and your nutrition facts. So if you want to know that I can read on that label and pronounce all the words of the things that are in there, this is kind of the same translation of being able to understand the nutrition facts of the feature that you want to use into your model. And so once you click in there, this one shows customer tenure. It then gives you some options of the entitlements that you need to subscribe to it, to have access to it. It also tells you load dates. It tells you also who owns that feature. So if you have questions or needs around that, you have your engineering point of contact, and you have also your business point of contact. And then you can subscribe to also any type of notifications that are sent out around that specific feature. So this gives you a lot more of that information that you'd want to know, so you can trust the data, know where it came from, who owns it, and what exactly that data point is. And then if you take it a little bit deeper, some of those tabs at the top, specifically, I am not standing in the right
that
spot.
way.
There we go. So same as like, hey, farm to table, that's a big trend right now of being able to know exactly where your food came from when you go out to a farm to table restaurant. This is the same thing. So if the user clicks on the lineage tab, we're then able to, through DBT Deal, to see that lineage of exactly where that feature came from and where it's sourced from. And so that's a really nice way for users, before they put a feature into a model, to know that source information, to make sure it's coming from the place that they would expect it to come from or want it to come from. And then also can show upstream lineage too of where all that's used. So that's nice for us to know exactly each model that's using a specific feature, where in the past we might not have known that inherently without going through a bunch of documentation that is in a bunch of different areas. So this way it keeps it all in one spot, and it's easy for us to have strong transparency against that. Be better in pointing, whoops. All right, so in thinking about our outcomes regarding Feature Store, we're still certainly on the journey of what we're building here, but we went into it with some key outcomes that we wanted to make sure that we achieved as part of our build, and we've definitely have seen that. So just the first one in processing time reduction. For ourselves, just in what it took for us to make features, we've seen over 85% in just processing time we've been able to reduce around building features. Before, I don't know who in this room currently is a data scientist or a data engineer, but if you maybe have worked this way, it's the way that we worked, and it was very inefficient. Previously was a data scientist would go out and they'd build a feature, they'd build a model, and they might have it in Python or something like that, and then they'd toss it over the fence to data engineering, and we'd have to turn that into SQL code to be able to make that work with our old MLOps platform. That was something with a lot of rework that had to happen, and also a lot of conversations back and forth, because maybe that model was built with features where that data was pulled from the wrong place. So this was really meant to reduce that processing time of what it would take to create that feature, and also take the rework out of it. So that's a significant piece that's come into play as we've put Feature Store into production. Also, the reduction in time spent to build models, because you're not going out there and not only building new features, but you're also not hunting and pecking and looking for different data that you need for that model. It's in one place, you know where it came from, and so then that way it's reducing that amount of like, let me just go out there and search and see what I can find. And then increase speed to market. So business outcomes realized and tracked sooner, because if you take a lot of that data wrangling out of it, and you're able to reduce the time that it takes to have feature ready for model production, that's significant. And then the other piece where we've really seen a time reduction too is same when our models would have to go through model risk management, highly regulated industry. The model risk management team would have to go out and they would rebuild the features as well. This makes it where they don't have to do that. So that reduces the amount of time it even takes for a model to get through governance before you can put it into production. All right, so things to think about if you're like, hey, this sounds interesting. I may be interested in building my own feature store. The first thing I would say in terms of advice for you, look at your whole model development process end to end. And at Fifth Third, we use a lot of Lean Six Sigma tools as we take a look at processes And this is one that we started with. We took a look at from beginning to end, looking at what it takes to get a model all the way to production. And the feature store just happens to be one of the areas that we zeroed in on, where we felt like we could really have a reduction in the amount of time it takes to do something. But as you look at your model development process, it might be something else for you. And there's other areas that we want to tackle too, but this just happens to be the first one that we started with. Also, technical environment. This was one, Ryan mentioned a lot about the technical components that we use for Feature Store. We were very intentional about trying not to be hooked into a specific vendor, just because if we ever want to change things out, we don't want that to be super painful. And we want to be able to customize in the way that we built our data exchange for data products as well as for Feature Store. And so we leveraged technology that we already had and the abilities that were already native in a lot of those technologies. So then that way we weren't also bringing in a new set of technology into the ecosystem. We also learned a lot through the process because when we first started, we actually didn't build it with DBT. We were trying a bunch of other things, and then we were like, this isn't working well. And that's when we switched over to DBT, and we found that it worked a lot better and it performed, and that's when we really saw the time reduction too. All right, so final thoughts. Ryan, I think you're gonna also talk through some other lessons learned.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, it's really the domain-based approach for grouping features. That we kind of talked about earlier, and that was that fun find the broccoli piece. But early on, we didn't do that enough, and our feature store was just one big thing under the hood. And like from an access perspective, from how to actually govern it, it got messy quick. So a little more planning up front would have went a long way. Also, building a process early to capture the feature metadata and what we're also calling all the statistical data about those runs to do comparisons between feature builds is really important. That, again, we were able to iterate over time, but prior runs, we won't have that information, or other examples where like we had to basically go rebuild it again to get that data, we can avoid. So that's baseline now for us, but definitely learned a lot there. And this third one is really just, I think your company's size and what you're trying to achieve that really factors in. But for us, now, because our feature store is growing so much, we're gonna start being more concerned about like duplication, or if someone builds a second feature that's really competing with the first, or it gives you a different one, how are you gonna manage that? So we, like Shanna said, it's a journey, we're still thinking through it, but I would say just think about that early on, especially if you have a huge company. How are you gonna plan to review and automate the process if you're not already doing a feature store? And then I also just wanna call out, like, I think the value of this is gonna prove over time. It's not, if you're looking for a quick ROI on this one, it's probably not there. It's gonna be with a team, like we have anywhere from 100, 150 people, at least in our traditional data platform ecosystem. So like that will, as more and more of those teams leverage these features, it'll pay off. But right now, even though we've been building it, for about a year in this environment, that'll be a long payback period. So just something to keep in mind. But I'll let Shanna kind of close it out.
Yeah. So overall, like our conclusion, really by recognizing that we make a lot of data-driven decisions, and that's really a lot of our model ops processes, because we have a lot of models behind things related to risk or related to marketing or related to revenue. We're really able to gain more efficiencies. We're able to get more observability. We're able to have better quality, and really that helps us deliver business outcomes faster. So for us, it's an exciting journey. We continue to learn and iterate, but it's been really fun to get it into production and see how it's been able to save people time and also make it where it's a lot more transparent and trustworthy than what we were doing in prior state. So thanks for joining us today. We're not going to take questions from the audience, but you're happy to come up to and talk to Brian and I if you have any questions you'd like to talk through. And thanks for joining us again.
Thanks for being here at the last 4 o'clock session of the day.